Good morning, Mets fans, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of Driving with Mr. Met. I am Mr. Met, and it's been a while. It's been a couple of days since I've recorded anything for the show, and it's been a couple of days because there really wasn't a whole lot to talk about. And, that was sort of par for the course for the offseason so far for the Mets, because really for the last 30 days or so, or more, the attention has all been around getting a manager and his coaching staff assembled. And now that that's done, Sandy Alderson and his team can turn their attention to building the roster for the 2018 season. And that's going to start this week as the general manager meetings, the GM meetings are underway in Orlando, Florida. There have been a number of different reports talking about where the Mets are going to spend their money and how they're going to spend it and what needs or what holes they need to fill and whatnot. But they seem to be all over the place. There's some reports that have the Mets valuing a mid to late rotation starting pitcher higher than they value a more reliable bullpen arm. There are others that have that flipped. There are others that talk about acquiring a third baseman. There are others that talk about acquiring a first baseman, an outfielder. So there's a whole bunch of different reports and different rumors out there. And rather than sort of laser focusing on any one of them, I thought instead I would talk about where I think the Mets ought to be focusing their priorities and their attention. And even though a week or so ago I talked about Jay Bruce being unlikely to rejoin the Mets, I'm about ready to revisit that statement, because I don't think it's that ridiculous of an idea when I looked more closely at it, particularly when I read the different stories about whether or not the team has faith in Dominic Smith as the everyday first baseman. Personally, I don't know that I have faith in Dominic Smith as the next first baseman for the Mets. I'll say this with a preface, because I am most certainly not in shape, unless we're talking about round, because round is a shape. But, Dominic Smith is a professional athlete, and I am not. And so what I'm about to say may be insensitive or whatever, but he was not in shape when he got promoted last year. If you look at the pictures of Dom Smith, and I recently did this, mainly because I was collecting some new pictures for wallpapers for my computer, but if you look at the photos of Dom Smith during spring training and compare them to post-promotion in September, there's a major difference between the two time periods. Dom Smith put on a good bit of weight, basically put all of it back on that he lost. And look, I mean, again, I'm not saying that you can't have a larger body type and be a successful major leaguer. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them that have done extremely well. But the problem is that Dom Smith doesn't profile to be the lefty slugger that a guy like Ryan Howard is or was. Or like a slugger like a big guy like Frank Thomas or Cecil Fielder or Prince Fielder. These were bigger bodied guys, but their game for the most part was the power game, was the home run. And that's not Dom Smith's game, and that's the concern, at least for me. Now, of course, we all know that there have been positive things said about his defense. I didn't really get to see a whole lot of it last year. I'm not saying he was a bad defender, but I didn't get to see any flashes of brilliance that had been reported about him. So the long story short of all of this, if the Mets aren't completely convinced that Dom Smith is going to be the starting first baseman or the everyday first baseman, then going back to my Jay Bruce comment, it makes an awful lot of sense for the Mets to go back out and get Jay Bruce. Based on a couple of different numbers that I'd seen and read, the prediction was sort of like almost a Daniel Murphy-like contract, 3 years, about $15 million a season or so for Bruce. He had a really, really good season last year. I wouldn't be shocked if he's not available at that sort of bargain level pricing. But if the Mets can get him for that price, he's publicly said that he'd be willing to come back for a reunion in New York. Why not do it? He can play here. He showed that he can play first base, which is where the Dom Smith thing fits in. He can play right field, which means he can spell Conforto or play right field while Conforto is rehabbing. Let Lagares play center during that period of time. when Conforto comes back, he can switch positions from center field and right field. Bruce can switch positions from right field to first base. It allows for a lot of the roster flexibility and versatility that I talked about previous to 2017 in 2018. So that's my train of thought there as far as Jay Bruce goes. One other really quick comment, for me in 2017, 2018 Major League Baseball, you do not need to go out and overspend on a middle rotation starting pitcher. You can overspend on an ace, that I'll give you, but the fact that the game has become the starter goes 5 and the bullpen pitches the rest. I mean, hell, I can go out and throw 5 innings. Give me a lockdown bullpen behind me. So I would much rather see the Mets invest in a swingman type starting pitcher who can both act as a spot starter and also act as a middle reliever or a long reliever. But I'm all about the Mets investing their pitching dollars in a dominant bullpen, because if we've seen it over the last several years, the teams that have gone deep into the playoffs have done so on the strength of a very strong bullpen. So that'll wrap it up for today. I do expect to be back on Friday this week with some additional follow-up from the GM meetings. If there's any news that comes out of Orlando, I'll sort of recap that on Friday this week. But until then, I thank you for watching and for tuning in. I always appreciate it. If you're not already doing so, please follow me on Twitter at Mr_Met. And as always, let's go Mets.